If you're over 50 and someone asked you right now what your three most important retirement numbers actually are, could you answer with specific figures? Not a vague sense of, I think I'm okay, or I should probably save more, but three exact numbers you've calculated yourself. Most Australians approaching retirement can quote their current super balance because it's the one number that's handed to them passively on a statement. Almost none can quote the other two numbers that actually determine whether that balance translates into a secure retirement or a difficult one. Today, I'm walking through exactly those three numbers, what each one means, precisely how to calculate it for your own situation, and what action each number should trigger once you know it. Before we get into the numbers themselves, it's worth being clear about why these specific three, rather than the dozens of figures that appear across retirement planning generally. Your current super balance, while important, is a snapshot. It tells you where you are today, but says nothing about whether that's enough, how long it will last, or what gap exists between your plan and reality. The three numbers covered today are different. Each one is a calculated, forward-looking figure that directly answers one of the three questions that actually determine retirement security. How much do I need in total? What's the gap between what I'll have and what I'll need each year? And how long does my money actually need to last? Together, these three numbers replace vague anxiety about retirement with a specific, actionable picture, and critically, each one can be calculated using free tools and information available to any Australian without needing to commission expensive professional modeling. Just to get started, the first number is your total retirement target, the super and savings balance required to fund the lifestyle you actually want, not a generic industry benchmark applied to everyone, regardless of circumstance. Here's exactly how to calculate it. Start with your desired annual retirement income, expressed in today's dollars, as covered extensively across this series, as FAT 2026 standards provide useful reference points. $51,805 per year. For a comfortable single retirement, $73,337. For a comfortable couple, or $33,134, and $47,731, respectively, for modest retirements. But your actual number should reflect your specific situation, particularly whether you'll own your home outright, which dramatically changes your required income, as detailed in our video breaking down what $2,000 per month actually buys. Once you have your target annual income figure, the next step is determining what proportion of that income needs to come from your own super and savings versus the age pension, as covered in our assets test and pension trap videos. If your assessable assets sit below the relevant threshold, a meaningful portion of your target income may come from a full or part pension, rather than requiring your super to fund the entire amount. Subtract your projected age pension entitlement from your target annual income to determine the actual annual amount your super needs to generate. Then, using a sustainable withdrawal rate, and as covered in our video on why the 4% rule doesn't work in Australia, a dynamic rate of 5% to 5% is more appropriate here than the commonly quoted 4% figure. Divide your required annual super income by that withdrawal rate to determine your target balance. For example, a single homeowner targeting the $51,805 comfortable standard, who expects to qualify for a part pension, contributing $15,912 annually, needs their super to generate $35,893 per year. At a 5% withdrawal rate, that requires a target balance of approximately $717,860. The specific action is to run this calculation for your own numbers using the Money Smart Retirement Planner, which allows you to input your actual age, balance, and expected age pension eligibility to generate a personalized target rather than relying on a generic benchmark that may significantly overstate or understate what you specifically need. The second number is more immediately actionable than the first because it tells you exactly how much additional annual saving or contribution is required between now and retirement to close the gap between your current trajectory and your number one target. Here's how to calculate it precisely. Start with your current super balance and your number of years remaining until your planned retirement age. Project your current balance forward using a realistic growth assumption. 7% to 8% annually for a growth-oriented allocation is a reasonable long-term assumption, consistent with the figures used throughout our series, without any additional voluntary contributions beyond your current compulsory super guarantee contributions. This gives you your projected balance at retirement. Under current settings, compare that projected balance against your number one target calculated above. The dollar difference between the two is your total capital gap. To convert that total gap into an actionable annual figure, divide it by the number of years remaining until retirement, adjusted for the fact that contributions made earlier have longer to compound than contributions made closer to retirement, which a proper compound calculation, rather than simple division, accounts for accurately. As a concrete example, a 55-year-old with $380,000 in super, planning to retire at 67, projects forward at 5% growth to approximately $612,000 at retirement, under current settings, with no additional contributions. If their number one target, calculated using the method above, is $717,860, their total capital gap is $105,860, using a standard future value of annuity calculation to determine the required additional annual contribution over the remaining 12 years at 5% growth. Closing that gap requires approximately $5,400 in additional annual contributions, equivalent to roughly $104 per week. This is precisely the calculation that connects directly to our salary sacrifice video, where we showed how $100 per week in pre-tax contributions, due to the tax arbitrage between your marginal rate and the 15% contributions tax, costs significantly less than $100 per week in actual take-home pay reduction. The specific action is to calculate your own gap number using this method, then determine what weekly or monthly salary sacrifice amount closes it, converting an abstract sense of "I should probably save more" into a specific, fundable figure with a clear mechanism for achieving it. The third number is the one most retirement plans skip entirely, because it requires confronting genuine uncertainty rather than producing a single clean figure. But it's arguably the most important number of the three, because it directly addresses the sequence of returns risk and depletion risk, covered extensively in our video on why retirees run out of money in year 12 rather than year 30. Your longevity runway number is the age at which your retirement balance, modeled realistically under your actual planned drawdown strategy, is projected to be depleted, and critically, how that age compares against your actual life expectancy and the broader range of possible outcomes around it. Here's how to calculate it properly using the Money Smart Retirement Planner or equivalent modeling tool. Input your projected retirement balance from number 1, your planned annual drawdown amount or percentage, your expected investment return and its variability, rather than a single fixed figure, and your expected age pension entitlement as it interacts with your declining balance over time. The output is your projected balance at various future ages, critically including the balance at age 90 and age 95, not just an average case projection to a single endpoint. Compare that projected depletion age against the ABS life expectancy data. For your age and gender, a 60-year-old Australian woman today has a life expectancy of approximately 87, while a 60-year-old Australian man has a life expectancy of approximately 84, though both figures continue extending with age reached, meaning someone who's already 60 and healthy should generally plan toward the higher end of these ranges or beyond, given that life expectancy calculated from birth understates the expectancy of someone who has already survived to 60 in reasonable health. If your longevity runway number, the age your modeled balance depletes, sits meaningfully below your realistic life expectancy, that gap is the single most important piece of information your retirement plan can surface, because it identifies a specific risk requiring a specific response well before retirement, while options remain available to address it. The specific action is to run this exact comparison for your own situation. And if your runway number falls short of your realistic life expectancy by more than 2 to 3 years, revisit your drawdown rate, your cash buffer strategy from our sequence of returns video, and your overall asset allocation, rather than discovering the shortfall only once you're already living it. In your late 70s or 80s, these three numbers aren't independent calculations sitting in isolation. They form a connected sequence that, taken together, replaces vague retirement anxiety with a specific, actionable plan. Your number 1 target tells you the destination. Your number 2 gap tells you the specific, fundable action required between now and retirement to actually reach that destination, rather than falling short and discovering it too late. Your number 3 runway tells you whether, once you arrive at that destination, the plan actually holds up against how long you might genuinely live, closing the loop between accumulation and the decades of decumulation that follow. An Australian over 50 who has calculated all three numbers for their own specific situation. Not generic benchmarks borrowed from an article, but their own figures, run through their own circumstances, has fundamentally more control over their retirement outcome than someone relying on a passive sense that things will probably work out, or a single super balanced statement that, on its own, answers none of the three questions that actually matter. 3 specific actions, one for each number, to complete this week. First, calculate your number 1 target using the Money Smart Retirement Planner, inputting your specific desired lifestyle, your homeownership status, and your projected age pension eligibility, rather than relying on a generic SFAB benchmark alone. Second, calculate your number 2 gap by projecting your current super forward at a realistic growth rate, comparing it against your number 1 target, and converting the resulting shortfall into a specific weekly or monthly salary sacrifice figure, using the method demonstrated in this video. Third, calculate your number 3 runway by modeling your planned drawdown against your projected balance at ages 90 and 95, and compare that explicitly against your realistic life expectancy. For your age and gender, adjusting your drawdown rate or asset allocation now, if a meaningful gap exists, while the time remains to actually address it. This is video number 20 in a series that's covered everything from the age pension assets test, to salary sacrifice, to why retirees run out of money decades earlier than they expect. And if there's one thing every single one of those videos has demonstrated, it's that the Australian retirement system rewards specific calculation and active decision-making, far more than it rewards general intention and passive hope. The 3 numbers covered today aren't the only figures that matter in a complete retirement plan, but they are the 3 that, calculated honestly and specifically for your own situation, replace the vague question, "Am I going to be okay?" with a clear, actionable answer. If this series has given you the tools to ask better questions about your own retirement, that's exactly what it was built to do. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more straight-talking Australian finance content every week. Thanks for watching all 20 of these. I'll see you in the next one.